I don't know about you, I prefer more music. Well, first of all, my name's Richard and I come from Derry. I grew up in a place called the Creggan Estate in Derry in Northern Ireland. I was born in 1961, so I remember the Creggan and Derry before the conflict started. And it was actually a lovely place to live in the Creggan. I was out as a young boy kicking a football around the street. But then what seemed like overnight to me, everything suddenly changed. And the Creggan, Derry and Northern Ireland became a violent place to live. It looked and felt like a war zone. There were shootings, there was bombings, there was riots on a daily occurrence. Hijacked lorries, hijacked buses, cars, put across the road and set on fire. And in many ways, for a young boy to look at that, it was actually exciting in a way. Um, in January 1972, a very sad but very well-known incident happened in Derry, and it became known as Bloody Sunday, where 13 innocent people were shot dead in the streets of Derry by the British Army. At least 4 or 5 of those people lived within 30 seconds walk from my house. So as you can imagine, the Creggan, Derry, was a very volatile place to live. Arguably, the weeks and months that followed Bloody Sunday were among the most violent period in the history of the Northern Ireland conflict. I went to a local primary school, Rosemount Primary School, and was on the edge of the Creggan. And beside the school was a police station. And because the police station was located at the edge of the Creggan, it was a target for the IRA. It was a target for rioters on a daily basis down there. So you had shooting incidents, you had bombing incidents, and you had riots. So eventually, the British Army were brought in to protect the police station. So you had these semi-permanent military installations all set up. Army lookout posts or sangars or army huts or whatever. They were built to protect the soldiers from bombs and bullets. One of these army lookout posts was positioned at the bottom of the school football pitch. So about 3 months after Bloody Sunday, on the 4th of May 1972, I was only 10 years old at the time. I got out of school as normal, and me and my friends were racing towards the school gate. And as we did so, we ran along the bottom of the school football pitch. And so we had to pass this British Army lookout post here on my right-hand side. When I was about 10 feet away from it, a soldier fired a rubber bullet. The rubber bullet hit me here on the bridge of the nose. I lost this eye, and I was permanently blinded in my left eye. What I remember that day was running up towards the lookout post, and the next thing I remember, I woke up and I was lying on the school canteen table, where my music teacher, Mr. Giles Doherty, he heard the bang, he ran up, he found me lying on the ground, he lifted me and carried me in and put me on the canteen table. And I remember him saying to me, "What's your name, son?" And I told him my name was Richard Moore. And he got a bit of a shock because he knew me very well. I was in his music class. But he wasn't able to identify me because of the extent of the injuries. My nose was completely flattened. My eyeballs were out of their sockets. And my face was just a bloody mess. So I went to hospital. I spent 2 weeks in hospital. The first week, I really don't remember that much. I was on intensive care. Initially, they thought I was going to die from the injuries. Then they thought I might have had brain damage. And then finally, they told me, Mommy and Daddy, that I would be blind for the rest of my life. But after that first week, they moved me out into the general ward. And I was a football fanatic. I loved playing football. I would have kicked a Coke can around the street just to play football. So there was a wee boy in the bed opposite me. He was just in for natural causes or whatever. And I remember joking with him and saying to him, "I can't wait to get these bandages off my eyes. Do I teach you how to play football?" Not realizing it wasn't the bandages that were preventing me from seeing. And for my family, it must have been very difficult. I come from a big family. There was 12 children in our house, 9 boys and 3 girls. Obviously no central heating in those days. And good Catholic family, 12 children. And as I say, I was the second youngest. And, you know, when they heard me joking about been teaching the young fella how to play football. They must have wondered, how are we going to tell Richard he'll never play football again? How are we going to tell Richard he'll never be able to see again? So it was about a month after I was shot. I was out home, and my brother Noel took me for a walk up and down our back garden. And this particular day he said to me, Richard, do you know what has happened? And I says, aye, I knew I was shot. And he said, do you know what damage was done? And I said, no. And that's when he told me that I would be blind for the rest of my life. And to be honest, I literally took it in my stride that day. It didn't impinge on me in any way. Until I went to bed that night. And when I was in bed that night on my own, I cried for the one and only time that I remember about blindness. And I cried because I realised for the first time that I was never going to actually see my mommy and daddy's faces again. And a 10-year-old boy, you don't think about the bigger things in life. You don't think about getting a job. You don't think about your education or anything like that. All as I felt was this enormous sense of loss, that I was never going to see my mommy and daddy's faces again. And I cried myself to sleep that night. The next day I woke up and got out of bed and began to put the pieces of my life back together. And I would say that day was the first day of the rest of my life as a blind person. I eventually went back to Rosemount Primary School, done all my exams there. Then, went on to the secondary school, done all my exams there. And eventually went to university, got my degree in 1983. I got married in 1984. I have 2 children, Neve and Enya. And done a lot of things after I was shot. I learned how to play the guitar. That's why I enjoy the music so much there. And played in bands. I also was compensated by the British for being shot. So they gave me money. And with half the money, I bought a house. And with the other half, I bought a pub. And 2 years later, I bought a second pub. And if anybody knows anything about the Irish, then a pub was a good business to be in. So I also kept my interest up in football. You know, in the mid-90s, I became a director of Derry City Football Club. And as you all know, Derry City Football Club is the biggest club on the planet. And back in the 90s, the mid-90s, the last time they were champions of Ireland was 1997. And I was a director in the club then, and it was a fantastic experience. You know, I also, played in bands and stuff like that, and I set up a folk choir, or a folk group as they call it, that sing at Mass every Saturday night. So I'm doing that 43 years now in the Long Tower Chapel in Derry. But why am I telling you all of that? Why in this very short space of time am I sharing with you the highs and lows of my life? I'm not trying to impress you or be boastful or anything like that. It's to acknowledge the things in my life that made it possible for me not only to survive being shot and blinded, but to actually see blindness as a positive experience. I actually don't mind being blind. I quite enjoy being blind sometimes. It's great when you have to do talks like this, because I don't want to look at you lot. It makes it a lot easier. So, but you have to ask yourself, how is it that a 10-year-old boy who lost his eyesight in such a traumatic way bounced back the way that I did? I boiled it down to a number of things. First of all, I come from a good family. My mommy and daddy, my brothers and sisters, were the people that caught me when I fell. The second thing is, I come from a good community. The people of the Craigan, the clergy, the neighbours, my teachers at school, my friends, they were all the people that supported me and my family to deal with what happened. And then, despite the poverty in Northern Ireland in those days, despite the fact that we had a conflict going on around our ears, I was still able to go back to school and get an education for myself, even as a blind person. And in my young adult years, I began to think about that. And I began to realise, there are children in other parts of the world that might have their eyesight, but didn't have what I had. And I remember thinking one time, I'd rather be blind and live in Northern Ireland than have my eyesight and have to endure the suffering that some children have to endure in other parts of the world. So eventually, I sold out the business and I set up a charity called Children in Crossfire. That was in 1996, so the charity's going almost 28 years now. Today we work in Tanzania and Ethiopia, providing access to pre-primary education for children under 8 years of age. We also we carry out nutrition projects and water programs in some very vulnerable, impoverished communities in Tanzania and Ethiopia. I would encourage you to look up the Children in Crossfire website, childrencrossfire.org, and you'll learn more about the charity. I'm not the only person that suffered as a result of my blindness. My mommy and daddy suffered enormously. My parents were two very devout Catholics. They went to Mass every day of their lives. They didn't support violence in any way. But despite their best efforts to avoid the troubles found us. I mentioned Bloody Sunday earlier on. My mommy's brother, my Uncle Jared, was shot dead on Bloody Sunday. And then 3 months later, I was blinded in a school playground. And I know it took its toll on my parents. Just after I got out of hospital, I remember one night being in my bed and my mommy would come up and she thought I was sleeping. And she knelt down beside my bed and she started to say her prayers. And then she broke down and started to cry. And the crying got out of control. And she was saying things like, "Look at him, God. He's only a 10-year-old boy. Please give him back his eyesight. Please give him back his eyesight." And she wasn't saying it in the cool, calm way that I'm saying it now. She was desperate. And then I would pretend to wake up and she'd kind of pull herself together. For me, I've told you already, I am a very happy and contented blind person. I am. But I wouldn't be telling you the truth if I didn't admit to you there were times in my life when I missed my eyesight. For example, when my two daughters were born, Neve and Enya. Any parent will tell you how amazing that is, to be there when they come into the world for the first time. And I couldn't see them. When they opened their eyes for the first time. When they smiled for the first time. I'll never get those moments back. I remember when they made their first communions and their confirmations in the Craigan Chapel and they walked up the aisle in their beautiful dresses and everybody telling me how lovely they looked and I couldn't see them. In those moments, I missed my eyesight. In those moments, I thought about the British soldier. My daughter Enya got married in 2018. And I found that day very difficult. Because, like any parent, I was proud to give her away. But I missed the fact that I couldn't see her in her beautiful wedding dress. All of you are doing something now that I will never be able to do. You're looking at a photograph of my children. You know what my children look like. I'll never be able to do that. That's the legacy of war. That's the legacy of violence. And we've all got to ask ourselves, is it worth it? Because it wasn't worth it for me. It isn't worth it for me. But despite all of that, I never had a moment's anger or a moment's hatred. And I want you to think about anger and hatred. Anger is like a self-destruct emotion. It destroys you from the inside out. Somebody once described anger to me, it's like drinking a cup of poison and expecting the other person to die. Well, I'm glad I didn't have that, to the point where I wanted to meet the soldier that shot me. I didn't know anything about the soldier for 33 years. And in 2005, I found out his name for the first time. And in January 2006, I flew to Scotland on my own and met Charles the soldier for the first time. And you know, to sit in a hotel foyer at a table opposite the man that blinded me for life and caused all those hurts to me and my family all those years ago. And to like him was an incredible experience. And I would say that day was one of the greatest days of my life. It's one thing being able to forgive somebody. It's another thing being able to tell them you forgive them. And that's what I describe as the fullness of forgiveness. And I learned two things about forgiveness that day. The first thing is forgiveness is first and foremost a gift that you give to yourself. Forget about Charles the soldier. If he wants my forgiveness, he has it. But that's not what's important. What's important for me and here, in my heart, for my peace of mind, that I forgive him. So forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about you. It's about you finding a way to get contentment and happiness. The second thing about forgiveness is it doesn't change the past, but it does change the future, I believe. So the fact that I forgive Charles won't give me back my eyesight, will it? It won't take away all the hurts that were caused to my family in those days. But what it did do and has done is change my future. And I genuinely believe that I would not be the happy, contented person, having done all the things in my life that I've shared with you, if I had been racked with anger, bitterness, and hatred. So I always say, you can take away somebody's eyesight, but you can't take away their vision. And my vision is the work that I do with children in Crossfire. My vision is what I'm doing here today, sharing my story in the hope that it helps you deal with challenges that you will face now or in the future. Thanks very much.